So I was recently talking to a friend of mine and they asked where the most haunted place in the UK is. Rather than give them one answer, I decided to make a tier list of haunted places and where they rank on the spookiness scale. Hi, I'm Mike, and a small disclaimer before we get into the list. This is only my personal opinions on locations that I've been to, and knowing how the paranormal can be, it may have just been a quiet night and I may have just been unlucky. So without any further ado, let's dive straight into it. Alright, so we're going to start things off with the Golden Fleece, which is said to be York's most haunted pub. I'm going to put the Golden Fleece into mid. We rented a room here for 2 nights, and although we didn't get that much activity, it had a great atmosphere and was in a very historically haunted city. We did, however, capture some strange noises in the bathroom overnight, such as some taps and what sounded like dragging. Next up is the Skirrid Mountain Inn in Wales. This is widely considered one of the most haunted places in Wales, but unfortunately I'm going to have to put it into quiet tier. We actually took my mum on this investigation, who was absolutely terrified of going on a ghost hunt before attending, and then bored out of her skull when almost nothing happened all night. To give you an indication of how quiet the evening was, it ended with guests staring at a temperature gauge as minor fluctuations. It is a very cool location though, and maybe it was just a quiet night for us. Next is 30 East Drive, the legendary haunted council house with reports of poltergeist activity and a black monk affectionately known as Fred. 30 East Drive is going straight into quiet tier. While we had some minor interesting moments, 30 East Drive didn't live up to the hype of the most haunted house in England. We had a very quiet night and I can firmly say that nothing paranormal happened. Health Hydro is a Victorian bathhouse located in Swindon. During World War II, it was used as a makeshift hospital for soldiers returning from war. It's now a swimming pool and has had reports of shadow figures in the main pool area. And I'm going to put it firmly into the active tier. We've investigated here twice and had some of the most compelling activity we've ever experienced. From a door slamming that 4 people witnessed and tried to debunk extensively, to a very intense feeling of dread after playing post-war music in the main pool area. It's a great location that we weren't really expecting much from, and it really surprised us. From the highs of Health Hydro in the A tier, our next location is going to come crashing down quicker than Cody and Satori's reputation. Straight into the No Ghosts Here tier with Bolsover Castle. This is one of the quietest, dullest and most boring investigations I've ever attended. The highlights, and I use that term loosely, once again include watching minor fluctuations on a temperature gauge and claims that a flickering torch was paranormal. The castle was never lived in and didn't feel haunted whatsoever, which is a real shame because investigating a castle was a really atmospheric and unique opportunity. Moving on to the Rifles Museum in Salisbury, the building is now a military museum which exhibits various eras of British history. I'm going to put the Rifles Museum solidly in the mid tier. The basement and the museum on the bottom floor seem to be the most active and are where we've got our most activity, with taps on the display cases in the museum and some weird REM pod activity in the basement where it seemed to be answering on command. I also had a weird experience in the basement where myself and another guest seemed to think that we were picking up on the same spirit intuitively. Next up is Shepton Mallet. It's going into the active tier because although our night here was quiet overall, I had someone or something whistle directly into my ear when I was checking on a REM pod that had been going off while no one was around it. The only downside was that sound travelled in Shepton Mallet very weirdly, and this meant that we spent most of the evening debunking a lot of sounds that were perfectly natural. While you're here, if you like the video, please consider dropping a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you like our content. Thanks. The next location is considered by many to be the most haunted house in England. The Ancient Ram has a long history of hauntings and weird goings on, and for a lot of the paranormal community it's a bucket list location to investigate, and comes with a level of prestige to say that you have investigated it. For me, it's going to narrowly miss the No Ghosts Here tier and go into the quiet tier. Unfortunately, when we investigated it, not a lot happened, and there seemed to be a lot of things that were being claimed to be paranormal, which definitely weren't paranormal. Did have quite an interesting Estes method in the Bishop's Room, but other than that, nothing else could be considered paranormal. The next location is easily going into the super haunted tier. The Stoke Museum and Spirit Shop is easily the most haunted location we've investigated. We've been twice, and both times it's been active from start to finish, giving us some of the best activity we've ever experienced. From loud knocking on command that made us absolutely crap ourselves to the point that we didn't want to investigate anymore, and this was about an hour into the investigation, to one of the best Estes methods we've ever conducted where we were getting relevant things come through. It's simply the best location we've ever investigated, and if you haven't been yet, you need to go. Next is Castle Cottage. Castle Cottage is going solidly into the quiet tier. This location seemed to pop up out of nowhere with reports of hauntings, and a lot of big teams have investigated it with seemingly not a lot happening. For me, it was also a really quiet night with very little happening. It wasn't until I looked back on my locked off cameras that I heard what sounded like a woman humming, and upon talking to a friend who'd been to Castle Cottage a couple of months before me, they said that they heard exactly the same humming and have also caught it on video. So it's sort of a verified, corroborated, triangulated piece of evidence, which is really cool. Other than that though, it was a very quiet investigation. The next location is Cogs Manor Farm in Oxfordshire. We've investigated Cogs twice, and both times so little has happened it has made me question if the location is even haunted. Cogs Manor is going into the lowest of the low of D tier. It's felt so dead on both investigations, pun intended, and has absolutely no atmosphere other than being an old farmhouse, leading me to believe that there's no ghosts here. And rounding off our list is Tudor World or the Falstaff's experience in Stratford-upon-Avon. This is one of the first locations we investigated when we knew a lot less about investigating or what our preferred methods were. But despite that, this location gave us one of the best paranormal experiences we've ever had. While at one end of the building we heard footsteps come up a staircase at the other end of the building. Now, this was 2 or 3 footsteps, and I assumed it was going to be the caretaker coming to check in on us. But it was 2 or 3 footsteps with no sound before or after, and then they just completely stopped. At the time I was more confused than scared, and offered to go and investigate it to see what it could have been. But my fiancée Patsy, who was terrified, didn't want me to leave her behind, so I didn't actually get the opportunity to go investigate it. This is easily going into the active tier for me, and somewhere we'd love to return to. So that wraps up my list. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear your experiences or opinions on any of these locations. On screen now is our investigation of the Stoke Museum, showcasing the crazy activity we captured. Enjoy!